My mom disowned me for refusing to fund my sister's wedding, so I evicted them from Dad's house and left them homeless. Growing up, it was always obvious who my mom's favorite was. My mom, Karen, 62 female, has 2 kids, me, 42 female, and my younger sister, Rachel, 37 female. From the moment Rachel was born, it was like I didn't exist anymore. I don't mean to sound dramatic, but it's the truth. Rachel was born underweight and sickly, so naturally my mom was really protective of her. I get it, it must have been scary for her, but instead of Rachel just being the baby of the family, she became the only child that mattered to Karen. Rachel was this fragile little thing, and Mom treated her like a princess. Everything revolved around Rachel, her needs, her wants, her moods. For instance, Rachel didn't like eating on her own, so Mom would hand-feed her until she was well into middle school. If Rachel had a school project or homework, Mom would just do it for her. And if Rachel didn't feel like going to school, Mom would let her stay home, no questions asked. Meanwhile, there was me. I wasn't ignored per se. I had food, clothes, and the basic necessities. But emotionally, I was on my own. Mom never really took an interest in my life unless it had something to do with Rachel. One time, when I was about 10, I had a dentist appointment that Mom forgot about because she was busy at a spa. I ended up waiting outside school for hours, until a family friend noticed me and gave me a ride home. When I got back, Mom acted like it wasn't a big deal. She just said, "Oh, I thought you'd figure it out." My dad, Michael, may he rest in peace, was the only one who really saw me. He worked a lot, so he wasn't home as much as I wished he was. But when he was, he made an effort. Dad and I would sneak out for ice cream runs or watch movies together when Karen and Rachel were busy. He'd slip me extra money for school trips or birthdays, and tell me not to mention it to Mom. Looking back, I think he was trying to make up for how overlooked I felt. But as much as Dad tried, the favoritism was impossible to ignore. Rachel got the best of everything. If I wanted something, I had to work for it or save up. "Rachel?" She'd just ask, and it would magically appear. One Christmas, I asked for a bike. Rachel asked for the same thing at the last minute. On Christmas morning, there was a shiny new bike under the tree for her. I got a pair of socks. When I asked why, Mom said, "You're older, you can save up and buy one yourself." It wasn't just material stuff, though. Karen was obsessed with Rachel's happiness. If Rachel had a minor issue, like a friend didn't text her back or she got a bad grade, Mom would jump into action to fix it. But if I was upset about something, I was told to stop being so dramatic or figure it out like an adult. I learned pretty quickly not to bother going to her for anything. Rachel soaked it all up, of course. Why wouldn't she? She was living the dream. She didn't have to lift a finger because Mom did everything for her. It got to the point where Rachel didn't even learn basic life skills. She didn't know how to cook, clean, or even manage her own schedule. Mom shielded her from everything, which made Rachel completely dependent on her. It wasn't until high school that I realized just how toxic the dynamic was. Rachel would cry to Mom about how hard her classes were, and Mom would do her assignments for her. When Rachel failed high school, Mom blamed the teachers, saying they didn't understand her unique needs. She even argued with the principal to get Rachel's grades changed. It didn't work, obviously, but it showed just how far Karen would go to protect Rachel from any kind of accountability. I, on the other hand, was expected to be independent. If I struggled in school, I had to figure it out on my own. If I wanted to do extracurriculars, I had to pay for them myself with babysitting money. And if I ever dared to complain, Karen would say, "You're the older sister, you need to set an example." By the time I graduated high school, I couldn't wait to leave. I got into a college in a different city, and I didn't look back. Moving away was the best decision I ever made. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't have to constantly compare myself to Rachel, or fight for scraps of attention from Karen. I could just be me. Meanwhile, Rachel stayed home. She didn't move out until she got married at 26. Even then, Karen was still in her business. She'd call Rachel 5 times a day to check in. "What did you eat? What are you wearing? How's your husband?" It was ridiculous. Karen even showed up unannounced to clean Rachel's house or bring her groceries, even though Rachel and her husband were perfectly capable of doing those things themselves. As for me, I was living my life. I finished college, got a job, and started building a future for myself. Dad stayed in touch, calling me regularly and even visiting me when he could. Karen? Not so much. She'd send the occasional text on my birthday or comment on my Facebook posts, but that was it. Honestly, I didn't care. I was happier without her constant criticism and favoritism weighing me down. Looking back, I think Karen's obsession with Rachel was about control. She wanted Rachel to need her forever, so she never let her grow up. Meanwhile, I was pushed out of the nest early, forced to fend for myself. It hurt at the time, but now I see it as a blessing. I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet, while Rachel became completely reliant on Karen. But even after I left, the dynamic never changed. Rachel was the golden child, Karen was her enabler, and I was the forgotten one. It's funny. Not funny, haha, but funny in a sad way. How some things never change. 11 years ago, everything changed. Dad started coughing a lot, which at first didn't seem like a big deal. He chalked it up to allergies or maybe a cold that wouldn't go away. But weeks turned into months, and he didn't get better. In fact, he got worse. He was always tired, short of breath, and just not himself. Still, he kept working because that's the kind of man he was, hardworking, selfless, and always putting others first. Karen, my mom, barely seemed to notice. She was too busy with her usual routine, spa appointments, yoga classes, and whatever else filled her days. Rachel, my sister, was back living at home by then, after her first marriage fell apart. She wasn't working, and didn't seem too concerned about Dad's health either. It was like they didn't want to deal with the inconvenience of acknowledging something was wrong. I was living in a different city at the time, building my career and trying to maintain some distance from all the family drama. Dad and I talked regularly, and I could tell something was off during our calls. He sounded weaker, more tired. When I asked if he'd seen a doctor, he brushed it off, saying he was fine. But I knew he wasn't. Things came to a head when he finally went to the hospital after a particularly bad coughing fit. The diagnosis, a severe lung infection. I dropped everything and rushed home as soon as I found out. When I got there, I was horrified. Dad was lying in bed, looking so frail and sick, and yet he was alone. Karen and Rachel? They were out getting their nails done. When they got back, Karen acted surprised to see me. She even tried to hug me, but I wasn't having it. I asked her why she wasn't with Dad, and she gave me some excuse about needing to run errands. It was obvious they'd just come from the spa. They were both freshly manicured and carrying shopping bags. The hospital admitted Dad, and I stayed by his side as much as I could. Karen would drop by occasionally, but only for a few minutes at a time. Rachel? She barely showed up at all, claiming it was too hard for her to see him like that. Meanwhile, I was juggling everything. Talking to doctors, managing his medication, and trying to keep him comfortable. I even slept in a chair by his bed most nights. Karen's lack of involvement was infuriating. She didn't work, so it's not like she was too busy to be there. But she acted like visiting the hospital was some massive inconvenience. I'll never forget the day she said, "He's in good hands with the nurses. What am I supposed to do, just sit there?" "Yes, Karen, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, be there for your husband." After a week in the hospital, Dad was discharged. He still needed constant care, so we hired a nurse to help at home. Karen was supposed to step up and take on more responsibility, but she was as unreliable as ever. She'd forget to give him his meds on time, or she'd leave for hours to run errands and come back with shopping bags. One time, she was supposed to pick up an oxygen tank for him, but she decided to stop at the salon first. By the time she got home, I'd already had to arrange for someone else to deliver it. Rachel was no better. She claimed she couldn't handle seeing Dad in such a vulnerable state, so she just avoided him. She stayed in her room most of the time, scrolling through her phone or watching TV. At one point, during one of Dad's worst episodes, she even went on vacation with her friends. She left me to handle everything on my own. I ended up quitting my job to take care of Dad full-time. I didn't trust Karen or Rachel to do it, and honestly, I didn't want to leave him alone with them. He deserved better. I cooked his meals, helped him with his physical therapy, and made sure he had company so he wouldn't feel lonely. It was exhausting, but I loved him, and I'd do it all over again if I had to. Karen did try to put in more effort as Dad's condition worsened, but by then, it was too late. She'd sit by his side, but she'd be glued to her phone, posting on social media or chatting with Rachel. It was like she couldn't even give him her full attention. Rachel only showed up when Karen guilted her into it, and even then, she'd make excuses to leave after a few minutes. Dad passed away a few months later, He was surrounded by me, the nurse, and a couple of his friends who had come to say goodbye. Karen and Rachel? They weren't there. Karen had gone to some wellness retreat and Rachel was out with friends. I called them both when it became clear that Dad didn't have much time left, but neither of them showed up. The funeral was a blur. I was heartbroken and exhausted, but I still had to deal with Karen and Rachel's nonsense. Karen spent most of the service talking to her friends about how unexpected Dad's death was, as if she hadn't been ignoring all the warning signs for months. Rachel cried loudly, making a big show of her grief, but it felt so fake. She hadn't cared when it mattered. A few weeks after the funeral, I got a call from Dad's lawyer about his will. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a small inheritance or a keepsake. But when I met with the lawyer, I was stunned. Dad had left everything to me, the house, his savings, his estate. Karen and Rachel got nothing. It broke my heart to think about how much pain Dad must have felt in his final months. Knowing how little his wife and youngest daughter cared about him, leaving everything to me was his way of saying he saw me, that he appreciated everything I did for him. But it also sparked a firestorm. Karen and Rachel were livid when they found out Rachel actually screamed at the lawyer, saying it was impossible that Dad would do this to her. Karen called me, demanding that I share the inheritance with them. I refused. I cut off Karen and Rachel. It was necessary for my sanity. They were furious about the will, and their entitlement was exhausting. I moved back to the city where I was working, focused on rebuilding my life, and eventually met my husband. We got married, had a baby, and moved overseas for his job. It was a fresh start, and honestly, I didn't feel the need to inform Karen or Rachel about any of it. Fast forward a few years, and I gave birth to my daughter. Out of nowhere, Karen showed up at my house. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so to see her standing on my doorstep was a shock. She looked different, less polished, more tired. She apologized, cried, and said she wanted to be a part of my daughter's life. She even admitted that she regretted how she treated me growing up. She claimed she'd been living with guilt ever since Dad passed and just wanted to make amends. I'll be honest, I didn't trust her. But I decided to give her a chance. For a while, things were okay. Karen would video call to check on my daughter and occasionally send gifts. It felt normal for once. But then, as expected, the hints started. Karen would casually mention how she was struggling financially or how hard life had been for her since I took everything. I ignored it, thinking it would pass. About a month ago, Karen called me. She sounded excited, which immediately put me on edge because Karen doesn't just call unless she wants something. She started the conversation with small talk, asking about my daughter and my husband, which was already weird. Then, she dropped the bomb. Rachel was getting married again. Now, if you remember from my earlier posts, Rachel's first marriage ended after about a year. She moved back in with Karen and never really got her life back on track. I hadn't spoken to Rachel in over a decade, so this news came out of nowhere. Karen went on and on about how much this wedding meant to Rachel, how it was a fresh start for her, and how happy it would make the family. I was polite, congratulated her, and figured that would be the end of it. But no, of course not. Karen then said something along the lines of, "You know, it's been really hard for Rachel to plan this wedding with her budget. She deserves a beautiful day after everything she's been through." I stayed quiet because I knew where this was going. Finally, she said it. "I was hoping you could help out with the expenses. It's the least you can do considering everything your father left you." I was stunned. First of all, Rachel and I don't even talk. Second, how entitled do you have to be to ask someone to pay for a wedding you're not even invited to? Because yes, Karen made it clear that I wasn't on the guest list. When I pointed this out, Karen tried to backpedal, saying, "Oh, we assumed you wouldn't want to travel with a baby, but of course you're welcome to come. You don't need an invite, it's your sister's wedding." I told her flat out, "No, I'm not paying for anything." She tried to guilt me, saying it was my responsibility as the elder sister to help Rachel. She even brought up Dad's inheritance, claiming that I was hoarding the family fortune while Rachel struggled. I reminded her that Rachel and I had no relationship, and if she wanted help, she could reach out herself. Predictably, Rachel never did. Karen didn't take no for an answer. Over the next few weeks, she bombarded me with texts and voicemails, all variations of the same argument. I was selfish, I didn't care about family, and I was letting Rachel down. She even said, "If you don't help, it'll ruin Rachel's big day, and everyone will know it's your fault." The thing is, Karen and Rachel were acting like I owed them something, But where were they when I needed help? When Dad was sick, I was the one who dropped everything to care for him. I was the one who stayed by his side while they went on with their lives. And now, after years of silence, they expected me to swoop in and save the day? Absolutely not. Karen escalated things by claiming that Rachel had already booked the venue and paid deposits for the decorations, caterers, and musicians. She said canceling everything would humiliate the family because the invites had already gone out. I asked her how they'd planned all this if they couldn't afford it. Her response? "We were counting on you." That was the final straw. I told Karen she could figure it out herself because I wasn't giving them a single penny. She started crying, saying that if I didn't help she'd have no choice but to cut me out of her life. I laughed and said, "You already treated me like I didn't exist. What's the difference?" I hung up and blocked her. My husband supported my decision, but he did warn me that there might be backlash from extended family. He was right. A few relatives reached out, saying I should be the bigger person and help out because family is family. But where was all this concern when Karen and Rachel were treating me like garbage? I ignored them and stood my ground. Karen's final message to me was a voicemail where she said, "If you can live with ruining your sister's wedding, then I guess you're not the person I thought you were." I haven't responded, and honestly, I don't plan to. I've spent too much of my life bending over backward for people who don't appreciate it. I'm done. After the wedding drama, I was done. Karen and Rachel had pushed me to my limit. I'd been letting them live rent-free in the house my dad left me for over 10 years. I guess part of me thought it was the easier option. I didn't want to deal with the drama of kicking them out, especially right after my dad died. But over the years I realized they had no gratitude, no respect for me, and no intention of ever being decent. Let's rewind a bit. When Dad's will was read, Karen and Rachel were livid that he left everything to me. Karen argued it was her house because she'd lived there for decades. Rachel threw a tantrum, screaming about how unfair it was. But the truth is, neither of them deserved a penny. Dad left me the house because he saw how much I cared for him in his final months, while they couldn't even bother to show up most of the time. It was his way of saying, "I see you, and I appreciate you." Even after inheriting everything, I let them stay in the house. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd change. Karen continued to act like the house was hers, renting out one of the rooms to cover her personal expenses, and never once offering to pay me rent. Rachel treated me like a villain, spreading rumors among the extended family that I'd manipulated Dad into cutting her out of the will. They made no effort to mend the relationship, but they sure enjoyed living in a house they didn't pay for. Fast forward to now. After Karen's ridiculous request that I pay for Rachel's wedding and the endless manipulation attempts, I decided enough was enough. I called my lawyer and had an eviction notice drafted. When Karen received it, she lost her mind. She called me, screaming, "You can't evict me. This is my home. I've lived here for 45 years. I calmly reminded her that the house was legally mine, and that she had 30 days to vacate. Rachel, of course, jumped into the fray. She called me every name under the sun, accusing me of being heartless and greedy. According to her, I only cared for Dad to secure the inheritance. It was laughable. She was the one who barely visited Dad when he was dying, yet somehow I'm the bad guy. Karen tried every tactic to make me change my mind. First, she acted tough, saying, "I dare you to kick me out. I'm not going anywhere." Then she softened, claiming she was too old to start over and that the house was all she had left. She even cried about how she'd been renting out a room to make ends meet, as if that wasn't the same room I should have been collecting rent on for years. None of it worked. The final straw came when she tried to guilt-trip me by saying, "What would your dad think if he saw you throwing your mother out on the street?" I told her, "Dad left me the house for a reason. Maybe if you'd cared about him even half as much as you cared about spa appointments, he'd still be alive." I know that was harsh, but I was done sugarcoating things. Karen made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. Rachel didn't take the eviction well either. She told Karen to move in with her temporarily, but not without making a big show of it. She called every relative to brag about how she was stepping up for Karen, claiming she didn't need anything from me. It was all so performative, like she wanted a round of applause for doing the bare minimum. Karen moved out on the 26th day of the 30-day notice. I didn't even bother to show up. I hired a property manager to handle the handover. Once the house was empty, I had it cleaned and renovated. I decided to lease it out to a family friend's brother, someone I trusted. It felt good knowing the house would finally be used by people who appreciated it. Meanwhile, Rachel's big wedding plans fell apart since I refused to pay. She had to downgrade from a fancy lakeside venue to a town hall. Apparently, this caused a lot of embarrassment among their social circle, and Rachel's fiancé wasn't too happy about it either. It turns out he didn't even want a big wedding. Rachel had promised him she'd find a way to pay for it, which was clearly code for my sister will pay. Not long after Karen moved in with Rachel, I started hearing whispers about trouble in paradise. Rachel's husband wasn't thrilled about having his mother-in-law as a permanent houseguest. Karen, true to form, couldn't help but meddle in their lives. She'd criticize Rachel's cooking, comment on how Rachel's husband ran the household, and generally make herself a nuisance. A few relatives have tried to guilt-trip me into forgiving Karen and Rachel. They keep saying I've gone too far, that I should have let Karen stay in the house. But honestly, I don't care. These same people were silent when I was being mistreated, so their opinions mean nothing to me now. Alright everyone, before we dive into the final update, I have a small request. We put a lot of effort into finding these incredible stories for you every single day, and your support means the world to us. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us grow and allows us to continue bringing you more amazing stories. Thank you. Now let's move to the last update. Update 4. Hey Reddit. Here's the final update on this saga. After Karen moved in with Rachel, I thought I'd finally have peace. I had the house leased out, focused on my family, and cut off most of the toxic relatives who tried to guilt-trip me into forgiving Karen and Rachel. For a while, I didn't hear anything from them, and honestly, I was relieved. But of course, that didn't last. About 2 months after the eviction, a mutual relative sent me a message asking if I'd heard what happened with Karen and Rachel. I hadn't, and to be honest, I wasn't sure I cared. But curiosity got the better of me, so I asked. What they told me was equal parts infuriating and, dare I say, satisfying. Apparently, Rachel's husband, Chris, had had enough of Karen's meddling and finally gave Rachel an ultimatum: either she goes or I go. Rachel was already on thin ice with him because of the wedding debacle. Remember how she'd promised him a grand wedding that I would supposedly fund? When that didn't happen, they had to settle for a small town hall ceremony, which embarrassed Rachel in front of her friends and his family. Chris had warned her not to overextend financially, but she didn't listen, and it caused a lot of tension in their relationship. With Karen living in their home, things only got worse. Karen would criticize Chris's cooking, his parenting style, they have a toddler, and even the way he spoke to Rachel. She would suggest how they should manage their finances, which was ironic considering her own financial mess. Chris tried to tolerate it for a while, but after one particularly nasty fight where Karen accused him of not being man enough to take care of his family, he told Rachel it was him or Karen. Rachel begged him to reconsider, but he stood his ground. Here's the kicker: Karen didn't leave quietly. When Rachel told her about Chris's ultimatum, she went ballistic. She accused Rachel of abandoning her just like everyone else, and even threatened to cut Rachel out of her will. An empty threat, considering Karen has nothing to leave behind. This led to a huge argument between them, and Rachel, frustrated and likely embarrassed, told Karen to figure it out herself. So where did Karen go? To no one's surprise, she tried to reach out to me. She sent me an email. Yes, an email, because I'd blocked her on everything else, asking if I would reconsider letting her move back into the house. She wrote about how life had been so cruel to her and how she had always done her best as a mother. She even tried to frame it as an opportunity for us to heal and rebuild our relationship. I didn't even bother responding. At this point, her manipulative tactics were just sad. After getting no response from me, Karen tried to guilt-trip some extended family members into taking her in. Most of them said no outright, probably because they've seen how she operates. One distant cousin agreed to let her stay temporarily, but Karen's stay lasted all of 3 weeks before she was asked to leave. The cousin apparently got tired of her demanding behavior and constant complaints. As for Rachel, she's now dealing with the fallout of her decisions. Chris didn't leave her, but their relationship is reportedly on very shaky ground. Between the wedding expenses, Karen's drama, and Rachel's refusal to take responsibility for anything, Chris has started pulling back emotionally and financially. He even suggested couples counseling, but Rachel has been telling everyone that he's the problem, not her. I also heard that Rachel has been venting to family about how unfair it is that I got everything from Dad. According to her, if I had just shared the inheritance, none of this would have happened. She conveniently leaves out the part where she and Karen ignored Dad during his final months and treated me like a villain for caring about him. It's always someone else's fault with them. Despite the drama on their end, I've been doing well. Leasing out the house was the best decision I ever made. The tenants are a wonderful family who genuinely love and respect the space. The rental income has given me financial security and allowed me to invest in my daughter's future. My husband and I are thriving in our careers, and we've started planning for a long overdue family vacation. As for Karen and Rachel, they've made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. Karen is still couch hopping between relatives, and Rachel is stuck in a marriage that's on the verge of collapse. I don't wish them ill. I just don't care anymore. Their drama is no longer my problem, and that realization has been the most freeing thing of all. Thank you, Reddit, for reading and for all the support along the way. Take care. And thanks for everything.